Hi, welcome to Infusion Health, the podcast. I'm comedian Chris Patrick, aka Self-Proclaimed Power Man, and I'm here with my co-host and significant other, Rach.
Hey guys.
Now, today we're talking about something that a lot of people have. It's out there, and there's also been a lot of famous people who have it and work with it. We're talking about dyslexia, and we got Christine Pilar Moore and Julia Ostroff, and they're dyslexia educators and artists. And we're going to talk about things with dyslexia and what you can do with dyslexia. And just because you may have dyslexia doesn't mean you're out. Like I said, there are a lot of famous people who do have dyslexia or suffer from dyslexia, and they get by just fine. So, ladies, welcome to the show.
Hi. Thanks for having us. We're really glad to be here.
Okay, so we, like, I know about, a little bit about dyslexia, and maybe you can educate me on this, because I know, like, somebody may be writing something and their E may be backwards or a letter may be backwards, and you're like, okay, these are signs of dyslexia. Can you tell us exactly what exactly is dyslexia?
Yeah. So thank you, Kristen. This is Kristen that's talking. Okay. I think, what you just mentioned in terms of like reversal of letters, so that can be a component of dyslexia. But I think what especially for folks who might not really have a sense of what dyslexia is, or have a misconception about the centrality of letter reversals, I want to explore a little bit of an understanding of dyslexia that, or definition that is widely accepted by the International Dyslexia Association.
Okay.
Now, so the definition is fairly technical, so I'm not going to just read that. But what I want to do is start with one of the crucial pieces, which is a component of language called phonology, which will come back to this term. But basically, so for those of you who are listening, if you don't remember how you learned to read or spell or write, it just means that because your brains were automatically putting all of these pieces together, what you're seeing, what you're hearing. So you may not be used to even thinking about a couple of key things. So one of those things is, what is the basic sound structure of the English language? Mm-hmm. And what does it mean to break language up into its smallest parts and put them back together? So people who don't have dyslexia may take these smallest parts for granted and how they put them together because it's happening automatically. And they still learn to read and spell and write just fine. But people who have dyslexia really struggle with these parts. So Julia's going to talk a little about what we mean by these parts of language.
Yeah, and this will help give a broader sense of what, or a more specific sense of what dyslexia is really all about. Mm-hmm. So in order to read or write or spell, one of the first things that we need to understand is that certain written images, for example, write the letter A, certain written images represent sounds. So for example, connecting that letter A with the short vowel sound ah.
Yeah.
Many of us, this is something that we take for granted, right? But this is the foundation on which reading, writing, and spelling is built. Mm-hmm. We also need to understand that individual sounds work together at the word level. Mm-hmm. So, for example, the word bat. It's made up of
that.
That. Yeah, like something.
T-H-A-T.
No, I'll
like a baseball player that would use a bat.
Bat. Okay, B-A-T.
B-A-T, yeah. And the word bat, but that was a great point of confusion there, right? Because you can have two words, they sound very similar. What's different is the way that our the parts of our mouths are forming a particular sound. Mm-hmm. In bat, we have that plosive b beginning the word bat. Mm-hmm. And there are three sounds in the word bat: b, a, and t.
Yeah.
Right? Then we've got the sentence level. We need to understand that in order to do our reading and writing and spelling, we need to understand that the sentence, for example, I swing my bat, is comprised of 4 very particular words, each with their own spelling pattern, sounds, and meaning.
Mm-hmm. I swing my bat.
And yeah, I swing my bat.
Okay.
So these different components are what make up what's called the sound structure of language.
Mm-hmm.
Understanding that letters are correlated with sounds, and that you put letters together to produce sounds in a certain order.
Yeah.
And when you have individual words, they have different spelling patterns, sounds, and meanings.
Mm-hmm.
This is the sound structure of words, and this is an area that in the field of literacy is called phonology or phonological awareness. And this is something that people with dyslexia have a really hard time with, or may have a really hard time with. So let's just go back to that example of bat.
Yeah, one quick
Yeah,
thing.
sure.
I remember in my elementary learning, I was in special ed, and just the word bat added with ed, and then they would switchly change it with ing. I completely got pulled off the grid because I'm like, okay, now I got to bring in the ed, and now I got to bring in ing, and how do you pronounce these words?
Yeah. And I think that, and what you're speaking to is morphology, which is a component that, yes, that is very classically something that throws off kids, particularly who have dyslexia, because there are rules that, like, again, if you're putting those concepts together automatically, you're not even thinking about you don't know what the rule is because you just learned it. But if you have dyslexia, there's an explicit rule that tells you, so the word bat is what's called, stop me if I'm wading too much in the weeds, but the word bat is a closed syllable. And what that means is that the vowel, that A is closed in by that T, which gives it that sound. Because our vowels, this is where, and it's very tricky because our vowels make different sounds depending on the letters that are around the word. So if you have the word batting, you can't just add on the ing to that.
Yeah,
you have to add an extra T.
Yeah, batting.
In order to preserve that short sound. And the reason for that is because if you take the word, B-A-T-E.
That would be bait.
Bait. Right. So there's different words that spell differently, bait. But if you take the word bait, B-A-T-E, that E is, that silent E is what's giving that A its long sound. Now, the tricky thing is when we add suffixes, and a suffix like ing, or ed, like suffixes that start with vowels, the rule is that we will drop a silent E. So when we add that suffix to the word bait, you drop the E, add ing, and it's now baiting. That A, that long sound, is preserved.
With bait, you got debate. You got debate, and so it's B-A-T-E. But you also got bait your hook if you were fishing, which is B-A-I-T.
Exactly right. And so, yes,
this is one of the conundrums of the English language, and you just hit it on the head. Is that other languages? Spanish is one of them. I know Hebrew is another one. You don't have all these choices. You get what you get. You have one letter that corresponds with one sound, period, end of story. And here you've got the sound A, which you're pointing out. We can have a vowel consonant E pattern, which is maybe A-T-E. We can have A like A-I, like in bait, what you fish with.
You can have
Yeah, you kind of A like AY, as in bay, as in the body of water, right? And the list just goes on.
Mhm.
So, and I want to jump in and just thank you, Rach, for mentioning in particular what got you, because this is a really great example of how things, of that sound structure, right? You might be able to recognize that BAT says that, but then what happens when you have a word that is now more than one syllable, right? So batter, batting, batted, and recognizing the number of beats or syllables in a word that's part of the sound structure of our language. And that is something that people with dyslexia might struggle with. They might struggle even to understand that the word bat has 3 different sounds in it, but at. They might just hear the word bat and hear all those sounds compressed together and not be able to pull them apart. People with dyslexia, I'll also just say, sometimes have trouble rhyming, hearing rhymes in words or creating them. So hearing that 2 words like bat and hat, some of us might hear they have the same ending sounds, but for someone with dyslexia, it's not always that clear cut. So just to summarize what we've talked about so far in terms of what is dyslexia, right? Because this is all about what we could go into, nitty gritty, right? All the words. But summarizing go ahead.
What are some of, like, because I knew, like, back when I was growing up, I think it was first, second grade. I went to this lady. I think her name was Mrs. Rye, and she had these cards with letters on them, and she had me trace these letters. I mean, all year. It got, as a 6-year-old, 7-year-old kid, I got bored with it. She's like, "What does M sound? Ma, ma, man." And it drove it day in, day out. I kept going through these sounds, and she could give me the whole letter of the alphabet. This sound makes this. This sound makes that. This sound makes this. But a lot of people, I know back in like the 70s and the 80s, a lot of people started to realize that your kid's not weird, and they started recognizing dyslexia. When exactly did they start recognizing that, hey, he's putting letters backwards when he writes. This is a sign of dyslexia.
Yeah, well, the history goes back a long ways, and the history of intervention goes back a long ways, which is also what I think you're speaking to. There were a couple of pioneers in the field of language-based learning challenges, and I'll just shout out their names because they are the namesakes of the approach that Kristen and I use when we're teaching kids with dyslexia how to read. And their names were Dr. Samuel Wharton, and he was a psychiatrist and neurologist, and his coworker, Anna Dillingham, who was a psychologist, an educator, and a scholar. And they started working in the first half of the 20th century. They noticed that people with average to above average intelligence were for some reason having a lot of trouble reading and writing. And it didn't track with their intelligence level, right? Oh. These are smart folks. But why couldn't they read? And so they did a whole bunch of research and they did studies, and this continued for decades. And the results of their efforts and their team, the efforts of their team, is called the Orton-Gillingham approach, which it sounds like your teacher may have learned, because what it is it's really a multi-sensory way to teach kids how to read.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I can't speak to all the instruction, obviously, that you had as a student, because it sounds like there was some frustration there. The particular component that you brought up in terms of tracing letters and saying the sound of the letter and the name is a multi-sensory approach, and that our eyes, our ears, our touch, and touch is often underutilized in teaching, but it's really critical that kids who have dyslexia, that kinesthetic component is part of it. So that tracing while speaking, while looking at the word, activating all those sensors are part of. It's not the only part, and if that's all you do, well, then yes, that would be a problem. But it is a part of learning to read. If you need that explicit instruction, that is a really important part.
Yeah, and that's the other part of this kind of intervention, which is, as Kristen said, it's explicit. We don't take for granted that our students know any one thing about language, that they know that A says at in a closed syllable. None of that is taken for granted. It's also very systematic, so new materials introduced one piece at a time. It may be tedious, as your experience, it sounds like was. I hope it was also helpful for you.
Oh, yeah. Now I look back at it, it was helpful, but back then when I was doing it, I was like, I know the sounds in it. I know the end sound is nah, and nah and nah and in, and
Well,
Yes.
for me, I mean, sorry. For me, I didn't have that kind of teaching. I just had, this is what the syllable is. This is what this is. This is what that is. And, I grew up even into high school thinking, oh my God, I hate reading. I'm never going to get it. I didn't come to appreciation of reading until I understood that I might possibly have dyslexia. I was an adult, and then I started enjoying reading. But, going through school, not knowing these things, it was just so frustrating because you get on yourself and you're like, why can't I read? I know I'm not dumb.
Exactly. And I think that, this is a good part to talk about, right? That there is a social emotional component to dyslexia, and it's not that dyslexia it's not that dyslexia causes anxiety or fears around what's wrong with me. It's that if a child has dyslexia and they are not receiving the necessary supports that allow them to succeed, if they don't understand, as your experience was of like, well, why am I struggling with reading and writing? And if the child's mistakes are misunderstood by parents and educators as carelessness, or if their resistance to academic work or to reading, like you had, is misunderstood as laziness. So right. And so kids, and what they have is they're working as hard as they possibly can and also not making progress. It's of course, it makes sense that would cause a child to become anxious, angry, have poor self-image, depression, like all of these things can be there for if there's just no explanation or support.
And also, they're not going to enjoy reading, like you said.
Exactly.
And they're not going to reap all the benefits that reading provides, right?
Yeah.
Which is, it sounds like, Rach, that you have been able to come to in your adulthood, which is wonderful.
Yeah.
And also power to you, because it sounds like you struggled through on your own quite a bit.
And very much so. And then when I came to understand dyslexia more, I'm like, oh, this can be hereditary to my children. And did my parents have it? And I've never had that conversation with my parents, but I have with my children. And even my daughter that reads very, very much says, Mom, I have dyslexia. Sometimes I just got to stop and figure out what that word says just so I can, but she can get through a 600-page book in a weekend. But
she's a reader. She is a reader.
Wow. Amazing. And I think your experience is not uncommon. It's genetic. It occurs within families. And, that's also one of the important things to, for parents listening, just to look out for in terms of, how do I know if my kid might need some support, right? What are the signs? And you all might have some experience with this with your own kids when they were young. I can just share that young kids, right, kindergarten through early elementary age, they might have trouble learning rhymes or recognizing rhymes. They might have difficulty learning or remembering sequences, things that other folks, again, sort of take for granted, such as like, you can just recite the alphabet. all in sequence, or days of the week, or counting to 20. If your child is having trouble doing that, kindergarten, first, second grade, these are red flags. Difficulty associating letters with sounds, right? That,
like we were talking about.
That we were talking about before. So these are all things to just be aware of as you're noticing your child developing, and then reach out for help if you have some concerns.
Yeah.
Isn't there a test for if you may think that your kid has dyslexia? Isn't there a test like we'll send them? You send them to somebody like you guys, and is there a certain test that you give them to see if they have signs of dyslexia?
Yeah. So in terms of diagnosing dyslexia, so we are teachers, we're educators, and while we are trained in teaching children who have dyslexia, we cannot diagnose dyslexia. Who would diagnose that is a neuropsychologist, and if you're going to have your child evaluated, it would be really important for that child to be evaluated by a neuropsychologist who has experience evaluating particularly kids who have dyslexia
and other language-based learning challenges. What we're talking about really is an educational neuropsychologist.
Yeah.
And they have a whole assortment of formal evaluations that they use. Mm-hmm. And then, the specific diagnosis within, the psychologists use something called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, version 5, the DSM-5. Mm-hmm. And they will, if the child has dyslexia, the way that it's coded in the DSM is as a specific learning disability. That's sort of an umbrella term for kids with reading, writing, and math related disorders. So your child might be diagnosed with a specific learning disability with impairment in reading, for example. And that diagnosis then entitles your child under a federal law called the IDEA to services. Mm-hmm. Services such as Orton-Gillingham-based instruction or placement in a private school setting that is specialized for learners with language-based learning challenges, or a special education classroom. So the importance of the diagnosis is the access to services that then follows.
Mm-hmm. So with a lot of kids nowadays, mostly on their computers and their cell phones and all that. And I work at an elementary school, and I see some of the stuff up on the wall or in the hallways, and I look at the writing, and I'm like, this is what it looks like in 5th grade. Do you think we need to go a little bit more back towards reading and writing, or less time on the computers?
Physical, not being on the computer.
Yeah, I think, computers, we're all kind of at their mercy, it seems like, right? But, absolutely, I think for all of us, but particularly for children, I think it's really important for that time on, because if you're a passive, if your engagement with, technology being used for good and for evil, right? Like we know this. So
yeah.
If your engagement is primarily as a receiver, a passive receiver of information, in which you're not really having to engage actively, you're thinking and you're just taking in whatever you're seeing that somebody else is saying, or games that you're watching, like that. Probably less of that is preferable. Now there are programs on the computer, like we can utilize technology in order to engage children, in order to bring them into or make reading more interesting. But it's the thoughtful there has to be thoughtful engagement with technology. And if there's not, then that's not helpful to kids. And I do think just personally getting off the screen and interacting with human beings right in front of you, looking at a paper book, being able to, take notes and write, like that's, those are all really good things.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay, too. And can we touch on it that I want to let the people know out there, if you or your kids may have dyslexia, that they're not weird. There's nothing wrong with them, and that there are ways to there are people you can reach and all that. That your kids are not they're not dumb, or there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with them. They just have something that needs to be looked at more.
Exactly. They need, what they need is to be taught in a way that they can learn. So if we have, we can't have a one size fits all, way of teaching, because that will fit for some kids and that works for them.
Yeah.
But but each kid is different. So when a child knows that they have dyslexia, and when they understand the kinds of support that they require to be successful, and when their teachers can provide those supports, and when students learn to advocate for what they need, that's really crucial, because the more knowledge a child has about themselves and how they learn, they can tell a teacher, I need this, I need this, I need this. This is not going to work. This will work. And it's empowering. It's empowering. That's what can help build confidence and self-worth to counteract, or hopefully, if it's early enough, not have those feelings of anxiety and having a poor sense of your own worth and value, from a very young age, that you can learn right away. You learn in a particular way. This is how you learn, and it's all good.
Yeah.
And I also just want to mention, just in our practice, we work one-on-one with kids who have dyslexia in a virtual space. We use that very technology, right? We use we use virtual reality not virtual reality. Yeah. That's a technical term. But we use the computer to connect with our students. And so we do all online tutoring. And so from our practice working with kids and getting to know kids this way, but also from Kristen's work as a full-time drama teacher for many years, kids with dyslexia often present with really rich and unique gifts and talents that it's really important to honor and celebrate alongside the work that they're doing, towards their academic reading and writing studies, right? Like we place a lot of emphasis in the school environment on the importance of reading and writing.
Yeah.
When we zoom out, we're whole individuals and whole creatures, and it's important that teachers as well as parents really focus on their kids, on a student's strengths, support those strengths, and also take actions that can help create stress-free reading experiences when possible.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there are some, there's some really, I'll speak to a couple things. Like one, in terms of what Julia said about this unique skills and talents that kids have. We all do, whether we have dyslexia or not. We all have the things that make us shine. It's really crucial for kids, particularly who struggle in those foundational aspects of education, like reading and writing, that the things that they do well are really cultivated, that space and time is provided to find what those things are and to provide a lot of opportunities for success. Because when they can see themselves being successful somewhere else, and to see that they're getting that praise, and to see their own abilities and skill develop, that confidence transfers to the classroom. Yeah. And that's something that I saw as a theater educator, and I worked in a school for kids with language-based learning challenges. So for kids whose challenge was reading, but who were particularly adept at singing, and acting. When they came to theater, you know, you got to see a kid really blossom, and you got to see also their classmates see them in another light, to see what they have to offer and to be seen as more of a full person. You know, that's really, really crucial.
Mm-hmm. So people out there, if you think you have dyslexia, there are resources out there for you. You're not weird. You're not different. You just learn at a different way than other people. But
and find your love for reading, but also find your love in just the things that you like to do in life.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I do, because I mentioned stress-free reading experiences before, I do just want to mention, you know, what those might be, right? If you have a child who is struggling in those early years, before they may be receiving interventions, or even during.
Definitely during, and even when they're receiving interventions, is that reading to your child cannot be underestimated.
Yeah.
It is an active thing, because you know what that does is, one of the challenges if you have a reading challenge is that, again, you're resistant to reading. The domino impact of that is that you're exposed to less vocabulary, you're exposed to fewer ideas, because so much is transmitted through the written word. And so if kids are continuing to hear, that means that their vocabulary won't suffer. Even as they're learning to read, they're still building their vocabulary, which is a hugely important part of reading, obviously.
And also a chance to connect and spend time enjoyably together.
That's what I was going to say. Find that time to enjoyably do it, because as I was growing up, my parents were like, well, if you're not going to get it, I'm going to crumble up your paper and throw it in the garbage. And it even deterred me even more from education. So
I'm sorry you had that experience. That sounds very discouraging.
Yeah.
But I know when my children were young, and we got to wrap up, but I know as my children were young, you know, I would have that time reading with them, or I would say, do you want me to make up a story, or do you want me to tell you a true life story? Do you want me to read from a book? And they got that enjoyment of reading. And I have 5 children, and not all of them enjoy reading because of this problem, but I have 2 that are very strong readers.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it sounds like you have taken your own experience and made choices in your life that speak to supporting your kids in, you know, as full human beings, as readers, and giving them the opportunities that they need in order to be successful.
Yeah. I just want to say one very practical note, because I think it's really important for parents. If you notice from those common signs your child struggling, if they are 5 years old, 6 years old, don't wait to get them evaluated. Don't maybe it'll get better. If we look at the IDA website, it's clear that if interventions are withheld, you know, until a kid is even in 3rd grade, that important time has been lost. Those early years really need to be taken advantage of, and getting those services takes time. It's a process. So if you have concerns, you know, jump on it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a great resource, the International Dyslexia Association.
The International Dyslexia Association.
Yeah, I would encourage parents to look at that website, and specifically they have fact sheets, as well as something called the Dyslexia Handbook.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to have you guys text me your resources so I can put them in the description line. And unfortunately, Chris has to get to work.
So if you have any questions, or if you think your kid or you show signs of dyslexia, go to the International Dyslexia Association website and check it out. And like they said, get evaluated. And is there a way people can contact you guys? You guys got emails or websites or something like that?
Sure. So we have our practice is called the Reading Porch.
Okay.
And so if you send an email to thereadingporch@gmail.com, that will come to the Reading Porch.
And you can also @gmail.com. Yeah.
Yep.
And the website itself is thereadingporch.com.
Okay. Okay.
Yep.
All right. Well, thanks a lot for joining us. This was a really interesting conversation. Learned a lot. Like doing it, especially with school almost being summertime and all that. So, I'll let Rach close us out.
All right, you guys, on here, the history is born on lines of hate. On here, we're trying to build lines of love and make you guys your best advocate. If you are looking for these wonderful people that joined us this time, everything will be in the description line. And if your child has problems with dyslexia, or you even think they have problems with dyslexia, take the steps to help your child so they can enjoy reading and enjoy life. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.